this for a minute to give people time to join, and then I'll do the intro, which unfortunately is the same music as the hold music because I'm using the podcast intro, not the news hour intro. So that'll be funny.
Okay.
Just a little peek behind the scenes. Hello, everyone. My name is Cameron Cowan. Welcome to the Cameron Journal podcast because it's Saturday. This is a very special and particular broadcast. I am joined by that Intel guy who runs geopolitics Twitter. And so here's how this happened. I watch his videos all the time, and he mentioned a video about how we are in a Cold War with China. And I had commented, I'm kind of like, oh, okay, I'm going to need the whole explanation. I'm not going to go try to find every video. I need the whole explanation. I know everyone else does too. Because I'm kind of like, I'm not sold on this Cold War with China idea. I will say from the outset, I put it in the description. I'm not sold. I am ready to hear the reasoning, all this type of thing. So it's been a long time. The last, I think, video we did might have been 2 years ago, sort of thing. It's been a long, long time since we've had him. We're very glad he's here. So we're going to dispense with the who you are, where you came from. They can go watch the other video. It's on the channel. We're going to dive right into the deep end of the pool. And obviously right now, for those that don't know, we've lost 20% of the world's oil supply. It's stuck behind the blockade of the blockades in Hormuz. There's lots of rumors of ships coming and going. I haven't seen any shipping going anywhere. And obviously for China that doesn't have a lot of domestic oil production, it has to import a lot of it. Most of Asia does. Australia has made a great business selling coal and oil to China. And China, Russia obviously are a match made in heaven on that front as well. And so this Iran war is, to a lot of people, looks like we're tying up loose ends. Venezuela, Cuba, if you're old enough to remember the Bush years and the axis of evil, we're doing a good job of taking out the garbage from that neocon perspective. And so this war has never made any sense. It seems entirely irrational. But in the framework of a Cold War with China, all of a sudden this matters a whole lot, because how better to control the world's energy supply than to do this, at which point it becomes a master 5D chess move. So we are here to find out about this new Cold War with China. Ironically, we just did a moon mission, so it feels very Cold War. But the cars don't look nearly as good, and the clothing is terrible. But I'm like, if my Cold War came with a '61 Lincoln Continental, I might be down with this Cold War. But it does not. I drive a Subaru Forester. So we're gonna dive into it. That's the situation. So, Cold War with China. Start from the beginning. Because I think Beijing might need to know this. They might not know what they've gotten themselves into.
Well, Beijing absolutely knows what they've got themselves into. So, I mean, you have to go really far back to kind of understand the mindset here. You know, I sometimes think the things that I say everybody already is familiar with, but maybe they're not. You know, China has a long-term strategy to make this century a Chinese century. They stated all the things I'm about to state. They have stated at various points through their development, especially since President Xi has taken power. And extended that into pretty much the end of his own life. And give me just 1 second. I apologize. I have
No. I was about to say first leader since Mao to proclaim himself great leader and change the constitution so we could rule for life. So
yeah.
He's trying to get to be Mao levels of power. So yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, it's the curse. It's a blessing and curse of having children and not having your own office.
Yes, 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 yes.
They were sadly they were distracting my train of thought. So
It's okay.
you have to go back at the beginning. Again, Chinese century. The last century was a century of shame. They wanted to make sure that they've set the stage to that they can actually uh, create or not create, but effectuate the one China policy. Again, something that I think everybody knows, but then they don't. The one China policy includes Taiwan. It's like their most important policy. It's like nothing else is more important than the one China policy.
Yes.
That also, and then they've flaunted the international laws of the sea by building artificial islands and taking over the South China Sea because of some ridiculous map that was made 500 years ago that nobody acknowledges or recognizes. Um, and they did that because they needed to be able to control the fishing because they have again a large import of not just energy but food, and so they're very Chinese centric first. They've the whole Belt and Road initiative that expands the globe and goes all over the coastlines and airways, seaways, the landways, land corridors.
Yeah.
All is to circumvent the United States. When you look at it from a global perspective, it literally goes around the United States. Like it isolates the United States. And so they needed to replace the consumer driven economy. First of all, it's a tacit recognition that they need consumerism, but they want to replace America with the rest of the world. And
I
so
still
they're
always laugh about them trying to do business with all those former Soviet Central Asian republics to build roads and railways and all this type of thing. And I'm kind of like, honestly, if you can figure out how to do business in Tajikistan, you can have it. Like, like, good luck with that. That's, yes, so.
that goes with Africa and South America. When you look at all the ports that they developed around Africa, it's extensive, and every place that they find themselves, they've made sure. In fact, it's a policy. Again, it's another policy, a dual use policy. The civil military fusion policy requires that everything they do in the civilian sector can be turned over and in support of any military activities. So every single port is designed to support a naval vessel as well, despite the fact that they don't really have a blue water navy at all. That's just their long-term development, their long-term strategy. I would also point out a lot of other sectors that they are covering down on in a total war situation. So, for example, the reason why they were sending fentanyl they could control that. They don't. And they don't do it all because they want to take out as many American citizens as possible without actually going to war. Uh, Honestly, China has killed more American citizens than probably anybody else since World War II. And but when you add up all the fentanyl deaths, it's China's fault, right? At the end of the day, they do not have to allow those shipments to go out, but they do it anyways.
Even before the fentanyl thing became obvious, I did a produced episode of this show called Opium, Opiates, Pandemics, and Wars. And at the end of it, and I said pandemics are very good at causing military conflict historically. And I said it's honestly a small miracle of modern international relations and institutions and norms, which were much stronger when I did that episode than they are now. That we have managed to escape the COVID-19 pandemic and not caused a war. Because in another day and time, the bombs would have been dropping on like month 2,
Right.
sort of thing. And we've managed to and I also noticed they've done an excellent job of never really taking the blame for that, never really taking responsibility for that. They've just kind of skirted on by and they never mention it anymore. No one ever talks about it. The world has moved on, all this type of thing. They're quite clever about that.
Well, well, I would also add the reason why they've been allowed to do that is because the U.S. holds a lot of culpability.
Yes, well, we funded the lab where this came from, so it is in our best interest that it not be talked about, and it is in theirs, which means no one's ever going to talk about it.
Yep.
Yes.
And so they continue to affect every sector. So they're constantly conducting cyber attacks and probing attacks. They're also the farmland they've purchased. I know people say they've that's a big to do or a big nothing or whatnot because when you compare it to other foreign countries that own land assets in the U.S. They actually dwarf China's ownership. The problem is the placement is odd, right? Almost every single place is next to a U.S. or sensitive facility. Now they did do now PBS did, to their credit, did a very extensive research and analysis and discovered that, and I think the FBI actually released a report, but discovered that a lot of these lands they purchased were turned into farmlands to produce illicit marijuana farms, right? And so that's honestly what the Chinese were doing. But again, it's multi-purpose, multi-use. They're not just farming to sell to get money then they get sent back to China. They're also likely using them as staging grounds for surveillance, possible espionage, targets of opportunity, those type of things. So
Yes, well, and that gets into the recent, there was the balloon scandal. That was a whole thing. They
that was
sent
kind
that weird balloon thing over the country, and it cruised by a bunch of things, and nobody necessarily took that terribly seriously at the time. Um, things like that. I mean, it's so bad in the tech industry, in any high end, comp sci program, they literally tell you, if a really hot Asian girl suddenly decides to be your best friend or wants to start sleeping with you, that's just a spy, and here's a number to call. Like, it's out. Like, this is orientation at Stanford. Prince, I mean, any sort of big, where very important people are, who are going to go do very important things with their lives. That's how bad that is. And it's at the student level. That's when they're starting. Which is why I always say, one of the things people do not understand about China is this is a 5,000-year-old civilization. They do not plan in 4 years or 10 years. They plan in generations and centuries. There's a hotel in China that's been continuously owned by the same family for 800 years. Sort of thing. And I always laugh that the Europeans have the history, but they don't think like that. We don't have the history, and we don't think like that. China has both. They have the history, and they 110% think like that.
right.
And I think a lot of people don't understand that they're quite content to wait us out, literally.
They are, except you have Xi, who wants to realize his vision probably before he dies, and so it's anybody's guess at how long we still have him around. Also, from a senile perspective, if he's able to, still, be of sound mind, and so there is a window there. And so going back to, I think it was 2021 or 2020, when Admiral Davidson, I believe, from Indo-PACOM commander, issued the first, official warning to Congress about China being ready to invade Taiwan by 2027, I believe was the number, and then it was even up to 2025, which I thought was ridiculous. But the 2027 number really stuck, and so the problem is that when you get to 2027, and when China meets all of their objectives to be initially operationally capable to actually invade Taiwan, the risk analysis becomes so high that the U.S. government, has to treat it as a certainty, especially considering the fact that the decision rests on one person, which is President Xi, and so they cannot allow that to happen. And so what you're currently seeing is the disrupting of President Xi's decision-making calculus, to where when he finally does get to the point where his generals do say, "Yes, sir, we have our military ready, every other aspect, cyber, our economy, industry, all of it's ready to go. We can take Taiwan." Instead of having that happen, we have since conducted disruptive activities, from kicking them out of the Panama Canal, to abducting Maduro and kicking them out of Venezuela, to forcing Mexico and the other Central American countries to tackle the cartels, to closing the border, to then conducting these operations against Iran. All of it, when you put it together, is to curtail that decision.
That's a tough pill to swallow.
I don't know why.
I'm not going to lie. That's all of this seemingly disparate things that don't make any sense. We've always wondered, why the hell are we doing this? I mean, Europe is practically having seizures on the floor about this. All of what you're saying is all of this weird stuff is all in the purpose of trying to contain China. That's
Yes.
the big dirty secret.
Yes.
The Panama Canal, I get, so I mean, people forget it was not a popular decision to give it to Panama in the 70s when Carter did it at the time. There, if you go back to New York Journal or New York Times archives, there were lots of very caustic headlines written at the time about that decision, and multiple administrations have spoken out regretting that decision along the way. That's not even a Trump thing. That's been a long-standing thing. People bitched about it in the 90s and 2000s. The Bush administration did not like it. There was a brief plan after 9/11 potentially to seize the Panama Canal back from Panama. They didn't do it, but the thought, and Dick Cheney thought of that too. And and so there was the thought that they just didn't do it. Um it's I mean, I think the part I think I struggle a little bit is, but will any of this work? They have Russia now. They're going to build a pipeline and twist Mongolia's arm into putting it through. And they'll in 18 months they'll build an entire pipeline between China and Russia, and then they'll have one of the world's largest oil reserves in their back door, and won't be able to do anything about it.
I would honestly disagree with that timeline. You're giving them way too much credit. All of this is not to just make the decision-making calculus a no, but it's to push the timeline in case he still considers there's a possibility of a yes. And so the goal is to continue to push this to the point where it's no longer a viable option, even if he thinks, okay, well, I can adjust here, I can adjust there. And also, I believe that even if he does consider that there are any kind of adjustments, simply securing another pipeline isn't going to be sufficient. The amount of oil moved by the shipping through from Iran was way more through ships than you'll ever get through a single pipeline, and they haven't even established that yet. So, plus other ways to affect that pipeline. I mean, imagine if a conflict actually did occur. There are things that we could do that would also completely, lock China in place. We could close the Malacca Straits. We could target that pipeline that has yet to be established. We could, in a very worst case scenario, and people think, oh, well, that's a. You have to understand, China doesn't care about the law of war. So if we were to ever go to war with everything short of nuclear is on the table. So they would unleash biological, probably. They would unleash chemical. They probably hesitate on the biological, but they would unleash chemical. They'd unleash all their cyber. We, in turn, maybe not us, but somebody, say like a Taiwan proxy, would destroy the Three Gorges Dam, killing millions in an instant. Right. And so that's also a possibility. And so so basically we've put our military capabilities on full display with Venezuela and Iran, and we've shown China that their military, their capabilities, their equipment is far, far away from being anything that the U.S. should concern itself with, and so that adds into the doubt that we have now, I believe, put in the mind of Xi. But yeah, we have a lot of options on the table in case he decides to still go for Taiwan. But we should probably talk about the reason why that's so important beyond the one China policy.
Well, I have two things on that. One is the war in Iran has gone so badly. This seems like it's much more of a demonstration of how incapable we are against drones and things like that than anything else. I mean, we've had fires, things shot down, half the bases have been shot apart, Qatar's trying to get us to leave to stop the attacks, all this type of thing. I mean, if that was a demonstration of military force, it doesn't seem to have gone well.
I think the problem there, and let's definitely not lose sight of the Taiwan piece, but the problem.
No, I have a very particular thing about that. We'll circle back on that. I've got it here.
Sure. Yeah. So the current issue at play here is multifaceted, because from one perspective you can say this has actually gone quite well, and from another perspective you can say it's gone quite bad. And it really depends on the perspective on which you choose to look at it through. So, for example, the damage that is caused to U.S. bases probably calculates into a couple billion, but even then, the damage did not actually it may have degraded some, but it didn't overall didn't affect the operational capability of those bases. So even though they were able to hit a hangar or hit a communication node, the actions that the mission set of that base was still able to be executed, still is to today. And then so we always try and say, oh, but it costs these billions. Okay, well, we've cost about $100 billion worth of damage to Iran, and they have no economy. So I don't see them recovering in the next 18 months. Right? It's going to take them minimum 10 years to recover, if not 20, depending on who you're listening to, but at least 10 years.
Right.
On top of that, we are still restraining ourselves. We are not conducting any. We've done all of this without inserting any boots on the ground. And that's because that is currently a third rail in geopolitics, which is sad because the full capability of a U.S. military does require a ground component. We could have secured the Strait of Hormuz months ago, or not months, but a month ago, weeks ago, whatever. And I would argue that we could do it with relatively little loss of life, but the media would glom on to every single one, right? And it would
My dad's been trying to get us to invade Iran since he was a Cold Warrior in the Navy between 83 and 90. And he said the biggest mistake about Desert Storm was that we didn't immediately go invade Iran. And when I was a kid growing up, I was kind of like, oh, Dad, you're so silly. And now here we are. I texted him the night it happened, and I'm kind of like, oh my God, you're finally, your dreams finally come true, Dad. Like, that I've poo-pooed all of these years, So, yeah, it's kind of like, I'm kind of like, good thing I paid for that master's in international relations myself. Otherwise, I'd be really eating crow. But it's, yeah, that, no, I mean, that is, yes. I mean, there's obviously a lot of lingering bitterness, and we have not had great relations between the U.S. and Iran for decades, for a long time now. And we'll not go down all that history. But let's leave Iran for a second. Let's bounce back to China and Taiwan. Let's pick that thread back up. I find it very interesting, and I covered this on the NewsHour and in the newsletter. The leader of Taiwan's KMT party, which is supposed to win the next election, was in Beijing a couple weeks ago. And I said at the time, I know what they're trying to do. Because China made a big mistake several years ago with Hong Kong. I'm
right.
kind of like, gee, see, you're so stupid. If you had played nice with Hong Kong and not invaded the place and made it protest, you could have gotten the Taiwanese to sign up for China on a we're one nation, two systems BS thing without so much as a shot fired. How
Right.
dumb are you? But now, fast forward a decade, I told him, like, oh no, they're trying to cut a deal with the Taiwanese government to do one system, one country, two systems, like Hong Kong. That's
Right.
that's their alternate is there a political solution that Taiwan will sign up to rejoin mainland China and will be one nation and two systems. And Beijing will do what they do in Hong Kong. They'll control who's in power in Taipei.
Right.
Call, and if they want to learn how to do that, call 1-800-MOSCOW, and Putin will tell you how to do that. Which is what he's been doing in Ukraine for several years, which is why we have a war there now, because he wasn't controlling the government in Kyiv. Ask anybody in the Russian sphere, they'll tell you exactly how to do it. It's not hard. A few bits of propaganda and suitcases of money in the right location, you can buy yourself a government. And Xi Jinping has more than enough cash to simply buy Taipei without a single shot fired, sort of thing. And I think they've now decided that's a quite viable option. If we can't invade them, we'll buy them. So,
Well, that's true, but they still have a huge populace to convince, and
yes,
they're
the last
there's
vote
a
failed 70%. No one wanted
yeah.
to join mainland China. Yeah,
They don't even describe themselves as Chinese anymore. They describe themselves as Taiwanese, right? They very much are. The younger generation is not as connected as the older generation, so they're seeing that divide. Also, I think that deal was coming with like contingencies, like, "Hey, we'll give you all of your energy needs, Taiwan, if you just join our two systems approach." And it's like, why? So we could be Russia and Germany all over again? Like, I don't think so.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Minus the fact you still have the TSMC problem. If China did come up
that's
with some political solution for Taiwan, they would have 90% of the world's chip production capacity. Thank goodness the Biden administration had the foresight to build that plant in Arizona. We need 10 more. perhaps starting at building them next door. Like,
The 2 micron chip plant being built in Texas. To be honest, I haven't looked into
yes.
it much more than a headline, but that would be interesting. So part of the reason why Taiwan is so
Apple
important
wants
is
to move
because
some of their chip production to the United States, is why they're building that. They need it for Apple
yeah, well,
Silicon. Yeah.
yeah, they absolutely need to, because the whole reason why we are getting hung up on Taiwan is not because we're defending democracy as much as some neocon might want to convince you of. It's because if they were taken and TSMC were completely under the thumb of the Chinese rule, then China would de facto control the global economy, the digital economy, right? And so they would have it from that endpoint, and then they currently can affect it through the IRGC. In fact, China's entire plan. So if you recall, China faced a dilemma, which was the United States and and its allies. And we had always come with this mission of being able to fight 2 major wars, on one on either coast. That was always our establishment. Everybody knew that. China knew that, and so their solution was, well, I need to overwhelm the United States so much and so often that it also then creates the perfect chessboard, if you will, to when and I'm talking as if I'm she, that then I can go ahead and take Taiwan with relative ease, because the U.S. is so embroiled in the Middle East and in every other location. Their domestic is undermined because I'm killing hundreds of thousands of their citizens every year. And I'm dividing their political thing, which they are successful at that. But
Yes.
the IRGC was very important to this plan, on top of Venezuela, on top of holding the Panama Canal, uh, and so that's again why Trump has done all these things. Because imagine if she were to take Taiwan and the U.S. were to say, well, we're going to get involved. All China has to do is point over to the Ayatollah and say, hey, I need you to close that strait over there. And then all of a sudden the U.S. and its Navy maritime obligations are then put back over to our security guarantees with Saudi Arabia and the global order in that direction. So I guess imagine if we hadn't done any of this, right?
Right.
Imagine, I hate to say it, I'm not trying to be too political, but imagine if we had Kamala Harris
Right.
and none of this occurred.
Right.
And all the while, the IRGC is still building up all their ballistic missile capabilities, their drones, still supporting Russia, still giving China all the fuel they ever need. China's still pumping fentanyl into the United States. People are still flooding our borders, and still growing their position in Venezuela. And then 2027 rolls around, and they're like, hey, time to go. Let's do this. They probably would have been successful.
Hmm. I hate that makes sense.
Yeah, me too.
Like, yeah, like I hate that makes sense. One, because Trump is cleverer than he seems, and that annoys me. It is kind of par for the course. I've been alive for the last decade. It's par for the course these days. But yeah, that weirdly makes a lot of sense. Here's the problem, though. If all of this is so, and you've laid out an excellent case, why the resistance from Europe? Did they not take the time to try to bring the allies along? Did no one call Ursula von der Leyen to be kind of like, ma'am, you've got to calm down. We're really trying to prevent China from doing something that will, completely screw us all over. And if you want to find out all the ways in which we'll be screwed over, call all of European manufacturing and automobiles, electronics, everything else. You're more vulnerable than we are, sort of thing. Because all of that shit in Europe everything electronic in Europe is imported. They have nothing. Everything's imported. Um, it just seems like, I don't know if it's a lack of communication or whatever have you, but this is a very compelling case. It makes sense. You're delaying China's invasion of Taiwan, and even delaying their expansion and trying to box China in. That sounds great. Someone forgot to call the entire European Union to tell them that's what we were doing. Um, or even given them time to prepare, bring up oil stocks, all this type of thing. The strategy seems great, the tactics effective, but the rhetoric that has come out of the administration, the way it's been done, has, in my mind, permanently basically severed the transatlantic partnership. It will never be what it was again. They're decoupling from American technology, American weapons, all this type of thing. You know, the only good thing is it has forced them to spend on defense for the first time in World War II. That's good news. You've only been trying to do that since the 60s. That's good news, but the fallout from this seems quite high.
Well, there's other players on the table, right? So like all of that. Can you still hear me?
I
Okay.
can, yes.
I was frozen there. So there's other players on the table. Putin could give two craps about China and their plans. It's not like he went to Xi and said, "Hey, I'm going to invade Ukraine," and got his blessing. Like he did that on his own, and
Yes.
for his own special abusive relationship with the past. And so the primary focus, honestly, wasn't even China from, say, 2007 to 2017. So for those first 10 years, like the U.S., honestly, our leaders didn't care. Maybe they're making too much money. Maybe they were like, oh, China will never be a threat. They need us. They need us to buy their stuff. I really don't, know the motivations to the stalling of the focus. But if you remember, back in 2007, was when Putin first started his expansionist plans by invading, by talking about the loss of the USSR being the greatest, failure. And then in 2008, he invades Georgia.
Yes.
And he did that because NATO was courting Georgia, but no country can join NATO if they're in current conflict. So Putin just put them in perpetual conflict. They still are. They're
Yes.
still in conflict.
They
Georgia.
literally rolled up, put a bunch of fences across farmers. They just picked a spot. Here's good. Put up some fences and was like, and now you're part of Russia. There's a very famous segment from the Grand Tour with the Top Gear guys, and they go there, and this guy's like, yeah, I can't go to my farm. Like, my house is here, but my farm is over there. But that's now supposed to be Russia, and there's barbed wire and some very mean men holding guns there, sort of thing. It's craziest annexation, sort of thing. Yes, and obviously Putin wants his sphere of influence to extend at least most of the old Warsaw Pact, but that certainly has backfired. He shares more border with NATO than he did before. Scandinavia went from ugh NATO to we love NATO. You know what? Sweden's like we love NATO. We've never been more excited.
Right, but to your point, NATO is, or not just NATO, but the European Union as a whole is full of like stubborn disbelievers. I almost feel like they are perpetually blaming themselves for World War I and World War II, which they should, but at the same time, they're carrying that into their own perpetual suicide. When you have George Bush on his waning years, last year, I believe it was, literally say, hey, it would be really nice if you guys paid more. And then the following year, when Obama stepped in and said, hey, it would be really nice if you guys paid more. And then Trump comes along probably 7-8 years later and says, hey, you guys need to fucking pay something.
Right, yeah. Right,
like,
run some checks. Like, yeah.
Like, we agreed to get to 2% by 2024. Is that not good enough? And Trump's like, no. It's not. Like, yes. Germany, at you're slaves to Russia, as they laugh at him in the UN. And I'm just like, but you are. Like, it was so blindly obvious. An elementary student could have painted it on a map. The fact that he pointed out to them, you have all your energy tied with Russia, and Russia is constantly being aggressive towards Ukraine. Don't you think you should be concerned about that? And Germany's laughing at him, like, but he was right.
Yeah.
And so it just goes to like this disbelief that these European leaders live in. And now look at where we are. They pledged a lot of money, right? The whole 3.5 to 1.5 on defense and 1.5 for infrastructure. Where's the infrastructure? You look at the United Kingdom's Navy. It is basically mothballed at this point. There is not one. They have like one or two or three or four functional ships out of like 20. So like the majority of them are either in maintenance or can't get out of dock for like a week at a, until they get plenty of notice. Like they're not ready to go today. Like they need like a good 2 weeks notice. And it's like, well, the war started 2 weeks ago. So like, where are you at? And it's that type of readiness I would piss me off if I was the president. We're in 2026 and they still are not ready to go in case something bad happens. Like that is insane to me.
No, and the
There's
last Trident renewal in Parliament was less about how much to spend on the nuclear deterrent and more about whether they should have one at all. I watched that whole thing every time Trident comes up for renewal, which is about every 20-25 years or so. It's always a conversation of, do we really need a nuclear deterrent? Yes. Skip that part. How much are we going to spend on it, and where are we going to build it? Let's just skip to that discussion. The should we have it at all thing, especially today's geopolitical environment. That's not an argument anymore. Like that, sort of thing. Um, but I mean, yes, I think there's been a lot of disappointment. I mean, of European militaries, only two countries have anything legitimate, and that's France and the United Kingdom. And both of them have been marginally useful over the last several years, even getting into the whole latest thing with Israel and Gaza and all this sort of thing, and how they weren't even the migrant crisis. Italy ended up bearing the bulk of that burden, so much so the Germans quietly gave them a load of cash because Italy was spending, at the one hand, the European Union was saying, you need to fix your budget deficit. And the Italians were kind of like, want to pay for the migrant crisis you've left on our doorstep because we happen to have a coast in the Mediterranean? Just whatever, sort of thing. And the Germans ended up paying a bunch and giving them money for all that sort of thing. There's just so much dysfunction there. I mean,
it's very
kind
I'm just gonna be honest. The whole entire
yeah.
from Europe is very Neville Chamberlain. So it's really sad.
It is very difficult, but I think there's also this perception that we are leaving allies and alliances behind, especially with the Greenland thing. Um, which, I mean, shout out to Denmark. They really did send 4,000 troops up there on a ready status in preparation for invasion, which would have been rather entertaining. Um, sort of thing. But they really did kind of gather their energies and be like, we probably should go defend that sort of thing. And so, um, yeah, it just seems like it seems like this whole thing diplomatically with allies, like the external story may be working very well. I just don't know that our foreign policy and alliance system that is a great part of our power is going to survive this. Does that matter moving forward? Are we all just reading this wrong? Or is it just that Europe's so far out of the readiness capability that they really are a giant liability and we should annex them and make them the 51st state? Like that, sort of thing.
First, second, 53rd.
Right? Like form an orderly line, 51 through 27, like sort of thing. Yeah, I mean it's yeah, because the read from the outside is, oh great, another Middle East adventure with no allies in sight that will probably last another 20 years. Oh boy. Like, sort of thing. And the picture you're painting is, no, we're doing it now so that China can't force us to do it later, sort of thing. And we're taking things off the table for them to kind of build this kind of box sort of thing. Um, and that makes sense, but I don't know how we're going to repair things with the Europeans. That seems to
Electing
be a
Marco Rubio.
problem. Well, Lord knows he's going to run in 28.
Yeah. Well,
It's
he's
yeah.
all the permanent class board, right? So all senators, for example, both sides of the aisle voted for him. All every European leader praised him for his magnanimous speech at the last Munich Security Conference, even though it was just a rose-colored version of what Vance said the year before. But regardless, I guess it just matters on how you frame things, right? They both said the same thing, but one said it with a condescension, and the other said it with a longing for a better, a better life or whatever. And so, It does matter on on your delivery. And so Marco Rubio would be a huge favorite that would be able to probably mend those ties and allow for the U.S. to truly lead the way. They always call us the president, the leader of the free world, but what are you leading when everybody else is getting their own special interests answered and the U.S. is left with paying for it all? So,
Well, and there's a lot of voter resentment. I mean, the one thing I've heard the most on my show from personal friends, all this type of thing, is, they look at the rupture as good. Finally, we can stop paying for everybody else's problems because the bill is getting quite high, sort of thing. I think there's a lot of voter resentment that it seems like, and so when Trump comes along in the second term and says we're getting rid of the hangers on, maybe we shouldn't be paying for transgender operas in Tajikistan or whatever have you. It was Ireland actually, but perhaps we should stop paying for those things. As someone trained in IR, I look at it as you're cutting off the most important parts of our soft power. I mean, why do you think they wear blue jeans in Japan? I mean, the new Syrian government comes in and announces their new DEI policy, American cultural supremacy for the win. Like, it's like, we've got Muslims in Syria talking about equity and inclusion. Like, we really are the greatest country on earth. We export everything everywhere. Like, and it just seems like, from an international PR perspective, it's we start with the isms, as George Bush put it way back in the day. Nationalism, isolationism, all these sorts of things. And it was funny because I had a NewsHour video in short, and all the comments were, yeah, we got tired of this after World War One. We didn't really want to be involved in World War Two, and after World War Two, we were really tired of it. And we've gotten thrown into this whole thing, and now the Cold War's over. And I think the mood of the country is we just don't care anymore. Like, we're over it. It's been decades. We're tired. And so I think when Trump comes along and kind of puts up the middle finger towards a lot of people internationally, a lot of voters are kind of like, fucking finally, like, sort of thing. Yeah. So
well, I
yeah,
mean,
that's just,
yeah, yeah, people want their taxpayer dollars to go for something that actually matters. And when they hear about all the things you're talking about, and then the list goes on, they just feel like, what are we doing? And so, of
yeah,
course, he got USAID and soft power capabilities, and he's reframed it as a target. The problem there was they weren't focused on anything. They were
yeah,
literally having these little ideas, these little wish lists, these little weird, I have a good idea fairy moments. And it's like, well, what does that serve? Well, I mean, and then they go through all this, song and dance on what it serves, and then they get the payout, and they're doing it all over the world. It's just a waste of money. And so now we're
yeah,
doing this approach that, we're using the same soft power but in a targeted way, right? We're focused specifically on Central America and South America, right, with regards to the same money that would have otherwise been spread all over the world. Not to mention the fraud that's being uncovered with regards to utilizing soft power USAID capabilities, basically money laundering, to support other initiatives. Some say democratic initiatives, but just initiatives that support the permanent class that was otherwise, hates this part of our political arm. I guess MAGA or whatever, this kind of political arm that is currently taken over the United States government. And I'm honestly here for it. Just a ton of corruption. We always talk about it. Nobody ever does anything about it. Well, here you are. So
yeah. I did want to, when it comes to the, how things are changing, and things are changing very quickly, it seems like there's a lot of people that say what the US is doing is suicidal. I don't think it's quite that bad. It seems to me that certain people in powers have realized we're moving into a multipolar world, and we have decided to lead the charge rather than react to it. And it seems like we have decided our pole of the system is going to be North America and South America, and we're just going to maybe concern ourselves with that landmass, and the rest of the world will do its thing, whatever that may mean, as long as it's not coming for or directly affecting us, which gets into reindustrialization. I read this morning on something about becoming a commodities exporter to try and reindustrialize, all this type of thing. By the end of this, the US will in de facto be in control of the world's energy markets, which means Ooh, Xi Jinping's gonna have to play a lot nicer with us. So's all of Asia, really, sort of thing. And all of this is kind of setting up a multipolar world that is acceptable to us. What's your view of our new multipolar world?
Well, I would say the multipolar world would be framed more as these other junior poles are starting to grow, and we still have the biggest tent pole, in the tent, if you will.
Yes.
Um, it's a multi. I don't push back against the framing of a multipolar world, but maybe the definition is a little different. I mean, we are essentially leading the way, right? And you
Yeah.
you can have multipolarity so long as it doesn't disagree with us. It doesn't
Right.
affect us way. I've been calling it. People call it deglobalization. I call it regionalization with global ties, because you'll never get rid of the underpinning globalization with regards to maritime trade and energy, the connected energy trade, and so of course we have to position ourselves to control the choke points, so we can effectuate any kind of negative decisions that we don't like in a multipolar world. So that's where we're positioning ourselves to sustain ourselves going forward the next 100 years, right? It's not going to be a Chinese century if we have anything to say about it. And I think we've pretty spoken pretty loudly right now. It's going to be
Well,
an
no,
American.
and let's face it. I mean, the narrative, we talk a lot about narrative. I don't know if you ever really watch my content or anything, but like I talk about narratives a lot. The narrative has been suicidal empire in decline. That has been a lot of the narrative, especially over at the Nation, which is very. The Nation's more liberal than I am. I'm very liberal. The Nation is more liberal. The Economist less liberal than I am, but same narrative. A lot of the narrative in what I would consider the prestige publications of political science, the narrative has been the American empire is in decline and this is its last gasp. And you
That's
seem to come in and say, no, 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 no. This is the intermission before the second act. Like, no,
right.
no, we're rearranging the chessboard to our liking so that we get what we want without us having to be as globally involved as we have been before, sort of thing. And that, yeah, so that's a very interesting narratively, that's a very interesting contrast, but that's the way I think about things.
Yeah, and I think the numbers, that's a good way to frame it, because I think the numbers kind of support that, right? There is, so long as the U.S. dollar remains the reserve currency, so long as we maintain our global presence from a military perspective, and so long as we maintain our demographics and can onshore a lot of things that used to be offshored, yeah, we are going to position ourselves to be an American centric century. The problem is when you rearrange the chessboard, there's a lot of growing pains. There's a lot because you're upending a century's worth of established order, in order to be ready for the next century. So that's what's currently happening. We're not an empire in decline. We're, like you said, we're just positioning ourselves for the second act. So
Yeah, no, I mean, and so, I mean, I guess that leaves a couple questions. you know Brazil is doing the BRICS thing. They're trying to get closer to Russia, India, China, South Africa, which, if we're trying to get South America closer to us, that could be fun. Um, in the near term. Um, but then I guess that also is the question of what the hell's the EU gonna do? I mean,
yeah,
I'm looking at it being like, China's path forward is clear. Russia's economy is collapsing, and so are their demographics. They're screwed. For 100 years,
China's
they're screwed. China's demographics are not great either. That's also, yeah,
no, China's demographics are probably worse than Japan's at this point. They just haven't gotten. Japan's is just further along. Um, I think that you're to touch upon the topic of demographics. I think is extremely important, because the
yeah,
reason why you're so screwed is because they created a welfare state that requires people to pay for it, and who are you going to tax? So it's
right,
this really process by bringing in this multiculturalism that they hopes and dreams will get jobs and be able to tax, but in reality they're having to take on subsidies to continue to facilitate that part of the welfare state. But it's a very messy thing they've created, because they don't want to go and tell their citizenry, hey, this entire world we've created for you is a lie. We were actually supposed to tell you you need to have more babies, if you want to maintain your culture and your values and your societies. Because unlike America, which doesn't require an ethnic background, every other country does, and so
Right.
they
Yeah.
they're in a big hurt. Whereas America is built perfectly for this type of economy where we can keep taxing the next generation so long as that generation has been brought up in American values. And American values have nothing to do with the color of your skin. If anything, so long as, and I know I'm quoting Pete Hegseth, but he's not wrong. When you have diversity is your strength when you have unity of purpose. And so, if the unity of purpose is simply to succeed, and to grow your family and to support your society, all in the framework of the Constitution, well, then that's all it really takes to have a successful society. No other country operates this way. And so you now look at Asia. Asia's suffering massively too. Japan's demographics have been in decline since the 90s. China screwed themselves with the
Oh,
Great
with
Leap
one
Forward
child policy. Yeah. Yeah.
policy. Both events were torpedoed any growth they possibly had, which is why they're invested so much into robotics, to try
Yes.
and to mitigate that. And in
And
fact,
their population stats are probably wrong. This is now coming out. They don't even have as many people now as they think that they do. And by 2050, that's going to reduce by half. So they
that
will be their population in 2050 will be about the size as we are now. Our population is still growing, most of immigration, birth rate's not good, sort of thing, which means we actually will be by mid-century, potentially the more populous country.
right, or will be
Mind
even on
blown.
or will be even on par, but with still a trajectory of growth, whereas theirs is literally like off a cliff.
Yeah, yes. No, so seriously, like China's going to do what's going to do. Their demographics are bad. Russia is their demographics are terrible, and this is their really their last gasp.
Right.
And they have populations out east that are not interested in being part of Russia anymore. That'll be fun. Um,
Yep.
and South America is
China and Russia aren't even friends, despite what they tell everybody else. So
that, yeah, and there's no love lost between Moscow and Beijing. I've said that for years too. South America is going to end up being very cozy with the U.S., and I kind of wonder how Brazil's going to deal with that. Being that I don't think that's what Brasilia would like, sort of thing. Africa's not going to be a factor for a while yet. It really, I mean, if I were the Europeans, I'd be feeling awfully alone right about now.
yeah,
With
they used to.
unfavorable demographics and an economy that hasn't grown since the introduction of the euro,
Right.
and that's 23 years ago now. That's yeah. It is no wonder all of my Euro friends are trying to move here. I have 3 people that are trying to move here, and I'm kind of like, why are you moving here? It's all of a sudden the picture's starting to become a little bit more clear.
Right.
Yeah, very difficult times ahead, which means someday maybe we will take Greenland, and they'll happily let us have it.
They just might. I mean, Trump's not wrong with the position of Greenland as far as like this thing of the past, right? They planted their flag there, and so now it's theirs because of some laws they wrote. It's like, okay, well, I guess the moon is ours then, right? I mean, it's just it's that's basically how simple it is, right? America's the first to the moon. We're first to plant our flag. Must be ours. The Dutch were the first to. Was it the Dutch? Yeah, I forget. Anyways, who is it that the Danes plant them? I'm frozen again. The
Yes,
Danes
yeah,
plant their flag.
yeah. Denmark arrived there first, planted their flag. Greenland's been part of Denmark for 300 years, and so it's
Right.
colonialism at one time did work like that. So
Yeah. A landmass controlled by this tiny government. It's just it is pretty silly when you look at it from that perspective. That said, I feel like Trump's approach was really bad. Like, we already had agreements in place to grow our military bases
yes,
at our like, we didn't even need the permission as far as the military aspect was concerned. The agreement was the U.S. could do what they needed with regards to the military thing. And so, of course, it's about the minerals and whatnot. Well, then sweeten the deal, like like
Yeah.
hey Denmark, if you allow us exclusive rights over your minerals, we'll give you this sweet forever like flow of cash. Like I don't, it's like a
Which
sovereign wealth fund.
incidentally you desperately need. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yes, yeah.
And why we needed to just say this is de facto ours. I mean, we could have brought them along. They've been such a loyal part of the U.S. Foreign policy for 25 years. I felt like it was such a horrible approach. So I definitely have always disagreed with Trump's approach on that.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, so I mean if I'm the EU in the present environment, you've got to rethink the whole European project. Slavoj Žižek actually wrote that in a newsletter this week. If pan-Europeanism is dead, then the EU is dead too. You've got to rethink the whole European project
Mm-hmm.
entirely in order to adjust to this new world. And that's not going to be easy because the Europeans don't move that fast. These are the
Right.
people that regulate anything before anything happens. Um, and I am in touch with someone who's very deeply involved in the European startup scene, and it's very misperceived, but everything is just so much smaller due to language compliance issues and all this type of thing. But I mean, it's very lonely for them right now without a lot of great ways to secure energy, especially with Libya being stuck in civil war and all this sort of thing. What's their next best move?
I honestly don't know. I haven't really been paying a lot of attention. I hear whispers of them trying to still court China, which is like the biggest mistake they could be making. They've really pigeonholed themselves into a corner that I don't know how they're going to get out of it. To be quite honest, there's no easy solution.
No, I mean, I think, well, yeah, I mean, I think them courting China is a bad idea. I think they really need to court the Middle East. Um, but I
But the
think
Middle
they
East
all,
is such a detriment to their societies. They're really in a
but
big
they need
issue because
they've got to get the energy from somewhere, and either France has to seize Algeria again, or someone's got to go solve Libya. That would be another good solution. Go solve Libya. They need the energy from somewhere, and they need money and a lot of it. Um, their options are very limited. I would play a lot nicer with Erdogan in Turkey. Start with that. I'd really get friendly with Turkey. Be kind of like, how would you like to be a member of the European Union, actually? Like, I would literally, I'd call Ankara and be like, how would you like to be the 20th member of the European Union? I find it interesting that there is rumors floating in the UK about undoing Brexit, which I think is rather entertaining.
interesting.
Um, yeah, it's not galvanized yet, but there's talk of it around that's getting more public. Um, sort of thing, which I think is partly continental Europe being like, somebody with a real military, please come join us, sort of thing. Um, you know, yeah, I mean, it's yeah, I think of this whole deal. Now, here's where I do agree with you. I think the US is arranging itself in a quite great way for this new world. We are moving and shaking to put ourselves in a good position, and I think if we can get through the next several years, probably to the end of this decade, I think we'll be in a great place in the 2030s. Um, I think Europe is in deep trouble. They've got to turn the beat around. I think China's going to have a lot of problems, especially when Xi dies. He's galvanized so much power to himself. Institutions, even in the Communist Party, have been weakened.
Right.
What's the plan? They don't have one because he won't allow them to have one. So it's going to be the death of Stalin all over again. Um, sort of thing. Yeah, and yeah, I think it's a very, I mean, so I think that all kind of works out. I think in some small way Africa could be a huge wild card, and maybe that's Europe's answer. A complete throwback to the 19th century. The answer is Africa. Weirdly
Yeah.
enough. um sort of thing. But anyway, well, this all's been it's an hour. Let me let you go. Thank you so much for coming by and doing this and talking through this. And I have to say, my mind is blown. I have been educated. I think we all have been. It's definitely a lot to think about and process and digest. So, um, yeah, this is the part where we usually do plugs. So let everybody know where they can find you on TikTok for more great content like this.
Yeah, thanks for this. By the way, we talked about a lot, and I kind of wanted to. There was one other thing I wanted to cover with
Yeah.
regards to Trump's trip to China. That's going to be very telling because they're going to roll out the red carpet for Trump like nobody's ever seen before, and everybody is wondering what is Trump going to say when he gets asked. So, if I if I go after Taiwan, or are you going to do anything about it? Like a conversation like that, a question like that is going to be asked of him, not in public, of course, and it's going to be interesting what Trump thinks. And so that actually also goes back to the microchip discussion, because honestly, if TSMC didn't exist, I don't think anybody would care. And so with
True.
the chip plants being built in Texas and Arizona are supposed to basically supplant that linchpin that TSMC has on the global economy. But it's not a turnkey switch kind of overnight thing. That's still like a decade out. And so we have this like window of time between 2027 rather, and probably 2040. It could, there's some wiggle room there. That where we need to be kind of like on edge with regards to how she views the world. So that's going to be very interesting. That's coming up. And so, yeah, look out for that, people. You can find me, that Intel Guy, primarily on TikTok. I have a large following there. I have a growing following on YouTube, same name. And also IG, that Intel Guy underscore, because somebody took that Intel Guy. And then
Yeah.
also on X. So I post on all four pretty regularly, primarily on TikTok. And I really appreciate your time, Cameron. This has been a great conversation. I haven't had an intellectually deep conversation like this in some time, so it was very refreshing. I certainly hope people are watching your stuff, and it's
Yeah, thank
been
you.
Saturday afternoon, so I want to thank you.
No, no, thank you. We had a lovely group. We've had a dozen to 20 people stopping by, so that's fantastic. And there'll be shorts of this coming out in the coming weeks. Yeah, one of the things on your point about China and the microchips, and then we'll get out of here. One of the smartest things the Biden administration did, which got them to move their meeting from China to San Francisco, which is always a power move. Make Xi fly, not you. Um, is we stopped a lot of the tooling, their access to tooling for microchips, and also all the American experts they hired. Literally stopped the visas and everyone had to leave, sort of thing. And it completely undermined their chip manufacturing. They've not recovered from that yet, which is, again, circling back, is why I think they're trying to convince the Taiwanese government to a one country, two systems, why don't you, sort of thing. Is because it's not necessarily going as well for them as a lot of people would have you believe, and the volume of propaganda they put out is honestly admirable. It's quite remarkable, the volume
Right.
of propaganda and everything. So, but all right. Anyway, thank you so much for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast, and we'll be in touch. All right.
Good.
Thank you.